May 7th, 2025 meeting of Senate Finance Committee will come to order. We have two bills on the agenda. We're going to start with Senate File 3446, Senator Clark. Your first time in Finance Committee, and Mr. Keenly going to come up with him. Welcome to the Senate Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of Finance. Other committees informed me I needed to either bring jelly beans or coffee. I didn't hear if there was anything I was supposed to bring you. Cookies, donuts. All right. Mr. Chair, I bring you Senate File 3434, the Claims Bill. Yesterday, the Claims Joint Committee met and reviewed the list of claims, and so after that committee, I bring you the A25 amendment that brings it into shape following what occurred at the Joint Claims Committee.
Okay, Mr. Keenly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The A250078 amendment, again, as Senator Clark said, puts the bill into the form with the recommendations of the subcommittee. There are appropriations for three different claims. Once the bill has been amended, there is an appropriation, or there is an exoneration claim for $65,000 to the Vincent Below estate. And I don't know what level of detail you would like me to go into on the claims themselves. There's unlike what typically happens in, for the other numbers in here, I know that finance typically likes to work with round numbers because we're dealing with either specific injuries or medical expenses. We reimburse those as those numbers arise. So the other two numbers are not nice round numbers like you are used to dealing with. There's a reimbursement to the Department of Corrections for $849.86 for reimbursing them for medical expenses that they have paid under Minnesota statutes 3.739. And then there's a award to Victor Lynch for permanent injuries to his left hand for $6,531.25. So the total appropriation in the bill comes to $72,381.11. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to.
Thank you, Mr. Keenly. One question about the exoneration or whatever. The 246 days in prison, do we have a formula based on how long somebody is inappropriately locked up?
Mr. Chair, and for the record, Jason Keenly, Assistant Deputy Revisor and Counsel to the Joint Subcommittee on Claims. Yes, Mr. Chair, there is a statutory minimum based on number of days, and then there are additional categories. The way that the exoneration statute is laid out, there are additional categories that there can be more money for that exoneration based on those categories. But there is a statutory minimum based on the number of days, both imprisoned and, not in this case, because it was just imprisonment, but then also on release.
Okay. Are there questions from members of the committee for Senator Clark or Mr. Keenly? If not,
Mr. Chair.
Senator Pappas.
I mean, I just have a totally irrelevant question, which is, it seems ridiculous that he spent 246 days in prison when it wasn't even a controlled substance. And I don't know why it took so long for the lab to determine that. It seems really an injustice.
Hence the compensation. Anything else to add on it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I think to Senator Pappas's point, this is a simple bill, but it provides justice. And so that was a lot what the Joint Committee discussed yesterday, was that it's straightforward, but this is one of the spots that we directly provide justice back to individuals such as Mr. Boulay. And so just want to note, thank you to Senator Carlson for his mentorship on this, and to Senators Anderson and Westland providing nudges and hints along the way to help me understand this a bit better.
Thank you. Senator Pappas moves the A25 amendment. Is there further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. On the bill, Senate File 3446 as amended, Senator Pappas moves that it be recommended pass on that motion. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. Thank you, Senator Clark. Mr. Keenly, you survived your first trip to finance.
Thank you, committee.
Thank you very much. Next bill we have up is Senate File 856, Office of the Inspector General, and Senators Gustafson and Kuhn are here. And in the packets, I believe there's the bill, which is the eighth engrossment, I believe, which is the one we're looking at. And there's also a CE1, which was just, it's not anything official, but it's what we were working off of after the amendments in the last week's meeting. And Senator Gustafson, you now have an A80 amendment to the bill. Would you like to deal with that right now? Do you want to speak to that, either of you? Or?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. Yes, with the A80 amendment, we've made additional refinements to clarify the responsibilities, clean up some technical language, and reaffirm the bill's intent. These changes build on previous amendments that were already addressed carve-outs for Medicaid, CCAP, WIC, and other federal programs by preserving agency primacy and creating space for interagency agreements when needed. I'd like to also address the recent letters submitted by DHS and DCYF, and while I appreciate their engagement, several of the claims made were inaccurate or misleading. First, the bill does not delegate final decision-making authority in federally regulated programs. It preserves DHS and DCYF's primary responsibilities as required by federal law, and only grants concurrent investigatory authority to the Office of Inspector General. Second, the letter uses speculative fears about CMS disapproval and potential loss of Medicaid funding, despite the fact that no actual CMS guidance or precedent is cited. In fact, we included federally contingent effective language specifically to address this. And third, the bill does not abolish critical fraud functions without replacing them. On the contrary, it transfers these functions to an independent entity specifically built to investigate fraud and protect public dollars. This is not duplication, it's accountability. If there are any remaining technical or clarifying language changes needed, as I suspect many agencies are watching right now, I welcome them, but I would respectfully ask that they be submitted in final specific form so we can route them to council without delay. We've addressed concerns, we've amended this bill at every stop. It's time to move forward, and happy to hand it either over to Senator Kuhn or back to you, Chair Marty.
Thank you. Senator Kuhn, did you have any comments?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just specifically with respect to the A80, I think this is the result of several communications, phone calls, Zoom meetings that we've had based on the discussions from the previous committee hearing here in the Finance Committee. I don't think there's any surprises to anybody here on the committee. This is the language that we came up with the first part is to make sure that commissioners and heads of agencies are notified and alerted when the office of when the office that we're creating here, the Inspector General, has a reasonable suspicion of fraud, but for whatever reason chooses not to investigate. Mr. Chair, you thought that was important. I agree with you that in those situations that the commissioners or heads of agencies be notified of that and alerted to it so that they can take some action if they deem fit. So, and then beyond that, I would look, subdivision 3, I think is kind of in two different categories, 1.8 to 1.14. Those are for those agencies that we have not classified as having primary investigative authority. And this just makes it so that those commissioners and heads of agency are more involved with any actions that the Office of Inspector General might make. to freeze funds and to make sure that they're working in cooperation with those agencies. And then the following two paragraphs, 115 to 126, are for those three agencies that we have categorized as having primary investigative authority. And it adds a step, and this was based on our committee conversation, where it adds a step before the Office of Inspector General can petition the court to freeze funds, that it that notifies the agency and gives the agency the opportunity to do that first. And that's kind of where we landed on that, and we did make sure that we, in both instances, that applicable due process and appeal rights were part of this bill, and that those would be applicable in those situations where the Office of Inspector General petitions the court. This would all be overseen by a judge, and so those due process and appeal rights would be preserved. And they would also, we added they would have to be consistent with the applicable interagency agreements in those situations where we're dealing with the agencies that have primary investigative authority. So those are kind of the changes and what we came up with that resulted in the A80, plus the two additional technical corrections that Senator Gustafson mentioned. So that's my walkthrough of the A80, and stand for any questions. Thank you.
Are there questions for the A80? And I will comment that I think one of the changes here when I looking at the bill, and I think what the agencies are concerned or feeling, is that the OIG is going to have, I think it's like 33 new employees based on fiscal note and so on, and the assumption, I think, and the concern of some of the agencies is they're going to redo hundreds and hundreds or thousands of investigations, like in Medicaid, when DHS has a team of almost 100 people who are looking at those, and so this is to clarify. In effect, the Inspector General can independently investigate if they feel there's a need to do so, but stating it's not like the expectation the new Inspector General comes in, we're going to do thousands and thousands of these. We're going to do it when we feel a need, and spelling that out. I hope the agencies will take a look at the new language, because I think this clarifies the reality that the office cannot do tens of thousands in these. But anyway, I hope this language is helpful with that. But are there, Senator Friends, you will move the A80 amendment? Is there a discussion of the A80 amendment? Senator Pratt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to thank you and the authors for working on this. I know you spent a lot of time on it over the weekend since we first heard this bill. I think my concern, though, Mr. Chair, is I understand the federal rules around Medicaid, but we have had some of the agencies haven't acted, I think, as quickly as we would have liked. And by putting these additional hurdles in for even what appears to be non-Medicaid investigations, my fear is we're not going to see the true benefit of this. I understand your concern that the agency might be overwhelmed, and I don't know that that's for us to manage. I think that's between the OIG and DHS and MDH to figure out, to manage that workload and who takes on what responsibility. But I'm gonna vote for the amendment, again, to recognize and respect the work that you've done. But I hope we continue to make this OIG a more independent and stronger office. When we start talking about having to cede, I have to give the agency the ability to investigate these non-Medicaid claims before the OIG can take action, I think is what got us to being over $650 million in fraud lost up till now. So that's my hope, is that we strengthen the office as we go forward. But I appreciate the work that you've done.
And Sir Pratt, the only comment I'll make on that is this does not limit the OIG's ability to independently investigate. If they feel there's any need to, they have the ability to. It just sort of doesn't make the presumption. we got to do this. I mean, I think I can picture an Inspector General coming into the office and saying, oh, we're supposed to investigate this stuff. And even if an office that's equipped to do that and has 100 times, 3 times, 4 times as many people doing it, this simply says the Inspector General has to persuade themselves, nobody else, that they have, that they feel the agency's not doing adequate work or fast enough work. But anyway, that's the nature. I don't think this restricts them that way. Senator Wickland on the amendment first, and then we can talk about the rest of the bill later.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate Senator Kroon going through the amendment. I think we did have discussions about ways to improve the language this weekend, and I appreciate the discussion about it. I think that the amendment does address a few things that I did have concerns about. It addresses, as you mentioned, about notifying agencies about reports. I think that is important that agencies are aware of work that's going on. If the Inspector General has received a report that is, a reasonable suspicion that fraud or misuse is being committed. I really think that's important. I think the subdivision 3 part of I think is an improvement over the prior language that was in the bill as it came to finance. I think that having a process for determining, whether an agency is the second paragraph that has to do with the primary investigative authority agencies, that they have an opportunity to interact, and the OIG needs to consider, are they investigating adequately or proceeding quickly enough. I mean, I think that is helpful. It does tell me that the desire of the bill authors is to have independent investigations proceed if they have a difference of opinion. And then the last paragraph about after reasonable notice and consistent with the IAAs, that they can still go back to the agency and request consultation and then go forward with a court order to freeze or stop distribution of public funds. It's still, again, I think it adds some steps that need to happen, which I think are important. But it does acknowledge that there is a possibility or cases that could happen where the new office could move forward with a movement to a court order to freeze funds, which I think, I still have some concerns about. So while I think it's movement and it's progress, my concerns about the fact that there could be simultaneous, or I don't know what word you want to use, but there could be simultaneous separate investigations going on within an agency and within the new Office of the Inspector General concerns me, not only because of the federal requirements, and I believe that what the agencies are asking for to make the section contingent upon getting that federal response is the responsible way to move forward with this. We need to find out, and they can tell us that with an interaction with the agency, with DHS, they can submit a plan amendment and see what is the response to a proposal that will be saying that we want a shared or a delegated investigatory jurisdiction for this new IG. So I think that is something that needs to happen. It's not only that concern about what the federal government's going to say, it's a concern about preserving the integrity of investigations. And if the agency is investigating and the IG is investigating, I just think there's a lot of questions about what could possibly happen if different findings are found or different results happen. And I don't want to see that we have a fraud investigation that, something happens to legally challenge it and we lose the ability to, successfully bring a case forward or lose a case in court. That concern still remains. As far as the seeking the court order independently, I would still like to see in the bill the specific appeal and due process language. The amendment that we're looking at does reference and say that consistent with applicable due process and appeal rights, and I think that's good, and I appreciate that that's been added, but the actual due process and appeal rights in the notice, that language isn't in the bill, and I really think it should be before we move this bill out of the Senate. So, and it's all about the complexity of these human services programs. I want to see us add an Inspector General office to be a strong addition. If we're going to add this, we're going to build this up. I want it to be successful, but I think the fact that human services programs are very complex. The agencies, all three agencies that are within my committee's jurisdiction are running these very complex services. Also in Senator Hoffman's committee, they could impact, our most vulnerable Minnesotans, people with disabilities, children, and the elderly. So that's why I really keep pursuing these questions, because I want to see it be successful, and I don't want to see additional negative impact on people who are receiving services from providers that might be investigated. So that's a comment both, on the amendment and the bill in general.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion of the A80 amendment?
Mr. Chair.
Senator Kuhn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to address the last point on the statutory cross-reference on the due process and appeal rights that you had mentioned, because I think an earlier version of this did have a statutory cross-reference in it, and when I was talking with Senator Marty about that, we decided to remove that statutory cross-reference because I think that actually strengthens the due process and appeal rights, because if you do a statutory cross-reference on one particular area of the law, it only applies to that. When you remove that and say applicable, all while understanding that this is going to be under court supervision, that would bring in any due process and appeal rights that might be applied, that would bring that into play in that court action. So I think when I first thought about it, I agreed with you. Yeah, we should have a statutory cross-reference. That's usually what I'm thinking. But the more I thought about it, I think it actually strengthens it to take the statutory cross-reference out in this particular case to make sure that all of the due process and appeal rights are brought into this process and are in play in that court action.
Senator Wickland.
Mr. Chair, Senator Green, I agree with you totally. I didn't want to see a particular cross-reference in this language. When we were talking about it this past weekend, I was pointing to other language in the bill that has references to the new office within one of the due process language parts of the bill. It's for, I think there's one for DHS and one for DCYF. It was more that I know that language exists and it's very detailed, and I just don't see that level of detail in the bill. So yeah, I don't want to reference one particular section of the statute.
Further discussion on the A80 amendment? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. And I will note that we have in the folder a letter from Department of Administration and DHS, Children, Youth, and Families and DHS. And I think you've been hearing from them as well, and I think you've indicated, I think Senator Hoffman had also raised some concerns, and I think that you indicated you'd rather take care of them, take another look at them on the floor, and so, and I will encourage you to strongly do so, because I think that I'm not the attorney, I'm not the one who deals with it, but the CMS lawyers do look at these things, and I think some of the, I saw about 3 or 4 of the things in the letters I was seeing last night that could be looked at, like the effective date, making sure that they have a chance to make sure that CMS does not have a problem with it. But I will defer to you on that, but I think you've indicated you'd rather deal with that. Take some more time to look at that and get that addressed later. Is there discussion from members of the committee on the bill? Is there, Senator Pratt, and then we'll go to the authors. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just wanted to thank the authors for their hard work on this and understanding that and really modeling that this is a bipartisan bill, and we are all, very interested in stopping fraud, and I think this is an important step to do that. So thank you for your efforts.
Thank you. Any further discussion? If not, Senator Gustafson, Senator Gruen, any final comments?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate everyone's time.
Senator Friends moves Senate File 856 as amended be recommended to pass. Is there further discussion on that motion?
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Pappas.
I'm sorry, was I sleeping when we went through the fiscal note?
Oh, we went through that the other day, but yes, we can do
got it.
that again.
Got it. Thank you.
If you wish, okay. That was a week ago. I have trouble remembering some things from yesterday. Is there further discussion on the bill? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. Thank you for bringing the bill, and I encourage you to meet with the agencies on the remaining issues. We are planning to meet tomorrow morning at 10:30 a.m. to process the Energy Omnibus Bill of Senator Friends. If there's no further business, this committee is adjourned.